Help me reach 1,000 subscribes. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every comment. Thanks. James never thought of himself as irreplaceable. He thought of himself as reliable, the kind of man who showed up, paid attention, and kept things steady when life got loud. For 5 years, that had been his role with Elizabeth. Not flashy, not dramatic, just present. He handled the quiet responsibilities no one applauds. Fixing things before they broke, listening without interrupting, making space when she needed it. He believed that consistency was its own form of love. Elizabeth didn't see it that way anymore. The shift wasn't sudden. It crept in through small dismissals. Canceled plans explained away with vague excuses. Conversations cut short because she was too drained. James noticed how her phone seemed more important than his words, how laughter became something she saved for other people. Still, he adjusted. He always did. He told himself relationships went through phases. That effort meant patience. One night, after another dinner eaten in silence, James finally asked what had been sitting in his chest for months. He didn't accuse. He didn't raise his voice. He just asked where he fit into her life now. Elizabeth didn't hesitate. She leaned back, arms crossed, and said it flatly, like she was stating a fact she'd already accepted. James, relax. You're replaceable. Everyone is. The word didn't land like an insult. It landed like a verdict. Replaceable. Not wrong. Not difficult. Just disposable. She went back to scrolling, conversation over. James sat there longer than necessary, letting the room return to its usual quiet. Something inside him cooled, not with anger, but with clarity. If that sentence hit too close to home, take a second and press like, so this story can reach others who felt dismissed without warning. Over the next few days, James watched Elizabeth through a new lens. He noticed how much of her routine leaned on things he quietly handled. The groceries that appeared, the bills that never became problems, the plans that came together without her needing to think about them. She moved through life assuming the floor beneath her would always be solid, assuming James would always be there to absorb the weight. He didn't announce anything. He didn't threaten. He simply stopped filling the gaps. When the sink clogged, he left it. When the car made a noise, he didn't check it. When dinner time came, he ate earlier and alone. Elizabeth noticed, but only enough to be irritated. She asked if something was wrong. James said no, calmly, truthfully. Nothing was wrong. Things were just changing. The first crack appeared when her car declined at a cafe. She laughed it off, embarrassed, texting James to ask if there was an issue with the account. He replied hours later, politely explaining he'd separated some finances to simplify things. No drama. No explanation beyond that. Elizabeth didn't like uncertainty. She liked systems that worked without her involvement. That night, she accused him of being passive-aggressive. James listened, nodded, and went to bed early. At this point in the story, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been taken for granted without realizing it at first? Days passed. The inconveniences stacked up. Packages went missing because no one tracked them. Appointments were forgotten. Little fires she never noticed before now burned openly. Elizabeth grew sharper, more frustrated. She told him he was being distant. James agreed. He said distance helps people see things clearly. One evening, she tried to regain control with humor. She joked about how he'd come crawling back once he realized how replaceable he really was. James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He realized something then. Replaceable wasn't an insult if you were already carrying the weight alone. It was a challenge, and Elizabeth had issued it without thinking. If one word could describe how James feels right now, type that word in the comments. Just one. James began spending more time out of the house. Not hiding, just living. He reconnected with people who didn't expect him to prove his worth daily. He slept better, laughed easier. Elizabeth noticed a change, but misread it as a phase. She assumed he'd orbit back once reality set in. It hadn't occurred to her yet that reality was already shifting. Before the next part unfolds, share this story with someone who understands what quiet effort looks like when it finally stops being invisible. James didn't wait for a confrontation. He waited for understanding, and when it never came, he stopped waiting altogether. Elizabeth noticed the absence the week the rent reminder didn't come. She stormed into the living room, phone in hand, voice sharp, asking why he hadn't transferred his part. James looked up from his laptop and told her calmly that he had already covered his share directly. He said it like a fact, not a defense. Elizabeth frowned, unsettled by how little emotion there was to push against. That was when the panic started to leak through her confidence. She accused him of being petty, of trying to teach her a lesson. James didn't argue. He told her lessons only work when someone wants to learn. The words landed heavier than he expected. Elizabeth went quiet, not reflective, just calculating. For the first time, she realized the ground under her feet wasn't guaranteed. Over the next 2 weeks, she tried different versions of herself. One night she was warm, nostalgic, reminding him of their early years. Another night she was cold, threatening, warning him he'd regret pushing her away. James stayed the same through all of it. Polite, distant, unavailable. The man she once called replaceable had removed himself from the role she took for granted. If you were in James's position, would you stay silent like this or speak your mind? Share your perspective in the comments and let others weigh in. The breaking point came on a quiet Sunday morning. Elizabeth sat across from him at the kitchen table and finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. She asked if he was planning to leave. James didn't answer right away. He told her he had already left, just not physically. He said the moment she called him replaceable, something fundamental shifted. He realized love without appreciation turns into obligation, and obligation eventually becomes resentment. Elizabeth laughed nervously, saying people say things they don't mean. James shook his head. He told her words reveal priorities, especially when they're spoken without hesitation. He reminded her that she never apologized. She never asked how it felt. She just assumed he'd absorb it like everything else. That afternoon, James packed slowly. No rush, no theatrics. Elizabeth followed him from room to room, alternating between anger and fear. She asked how she was supposed to manage everything alone. James paused at the door and told her that question answered itself. He said managing things had never been the problem. Acknowledging who made them manageable was. If one word describes Elizabeth right now, type in the comments. Don't explain, just a word. When James closed the door behind him, there was no dramatic realization, no last-minute plea. There was only quiet. For James, it felt lighter. For Elizabeth, it felt unfamiliar. She stood in the apartment surrounded by the systems she never learned to run. The silence she once enjoyed now felt loud. Weeks later, James heard through mutual friends that Elizabeth was struggling. Not ruined, not helpless, just finally aware. Aware that stability isn't automatic. That effort has a source. James didn't feel satisfaction. He felt resolved. He had given her exactly what she said he was. Replaceable. And in doing so, he learned he wasn't. He learned that walking away doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like calm follow-through. Sometimes it looks like letting someone experience the weight they never noticed you carrying. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes consistency has no value until it's gone. James didn't rebuild his life overnight, but he rebuilt it honestly. He chose spaces where presence was noticed, not assumed. And Elizabeth, for the first time, had to face a life without the quiet support she dismissed. Before you go, like this story, subscribe for more real, grounded stories like this, and answer this in the comments. Do people only recognize value after it's removed, or can they learn before it's too late?